Do you believe you'll be very far right now if you are more consistent? Today, we are talking about the enemy behind the struggle with consistency. This enemy is always with you all the time, determines how you look at situations, how you apply yourself to situations, and ultimately leads you to struggling with following up on situations consistently so that you can become or you can achieve those things that you desire to achieve. This enemy is so vile that they look like they are innocent, but in real sense, they are the real reason why you are not becoming consistent. That is what we want to identify in this video and help you build a culture of being consistent to achieve most of the goals that you'd like to achieve in your life. My name is Dennis Mboro. I'm the founder of DSM Advisory and Consulting, where we help entrepreneurs get more customers by articulating their business ideas well so that the customers can understand them better. That's where most of the challenge is when it comes to marketing and communicating to customers. We also help people become the best versions of themselves by sharing personal development content as well as personal branding. Everybody loves a good story. Do you remember the first story that you ever heard in your life? It is difficult maybe because you've heard so many interesting stories, happy stories, sad stories, inspiring stories from so many people in the course of your life. And what is attractive about stories is how they usually end. Like, how did this story end? But before we get to the end, there is a problem that needs to be solved. And this problem is something that draws us in, shows us that there is something that needs to be addressed. And now that there is something that needs to be addressed, there needs to be someone to address it that arises to be the savior, who comes, addresses the problem, and then eventually there's a resolution. Either there's a happily ever after, or the life changes completely and therefore leads to something that is better. And stories is a consistent way that we tend to look at life, because anytime that we want to learn something, we want to learn about the story behind the thing. Anytime we want to become someone, we want to look for people that we admire and learn about their stories. What was their life story? What were their struggles? What did they go through? What made them become what they became? That is what leads to people being able to sell books. But stories are told in a very short time. Like when you listen to the story of Mahatma Gandhi or the World War, lots of time, that's like 10 years, 20 years, sometimes 30, 50, 100 years is compressed to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, lessons, a movie, or maybe a series. It is all compressed so that we can be able to understand or consume and take the major lessons out of that particular story. And when we are listening to the story, we tend to relate ourselves to the characters who are in that story. For example, whether it is the main character, we can look at the main character who is going through the challenge that we are going through and how they are able to resolve that. And when we listen to that story after 1 hour or 1.5 hours, we are encouraged, we are motivated, and we feel as though we can be able to apply ourselves just like that main character was able to apply themselves and solve the problem that they were facing and ultimately had a very good resolution at the end. But stories are short expressions of what actually happened at that time that the story was happening. That is to say that stories don't tell the whole situation of what was happening in the life of this hero. What happened in the history of this hero? What were the other things that were happening in the context of when all these problems were being experienced? And there are other struggles that this hero had when they were dealing with that specific problem, okay, that led to now the solution. What challenges? Essentially, we are only told what is relevant to the story because the story needs to communicate a particular message. But there are other things that were happening in the life of the hero. Like, do we get to hear about the hero's brother or their relationships? We don't get to hear about all that information, but all that was happening in the context of the story that was being told, but for the purpose of communicating a certain message. For example, you can be able to go through adversity. A lot of that is cut out so that we can be able to get a succinct story that is going to pass a simple message. Here is the issue. That is not how life is actually lived. Life is not about one simple message that needs to be communicated. There are so many things that are happening in your life at any one particular period of time. And in as much as you're trying to address a certain problem that seems pressing to you at that time, there are many other things that are affecting you that prevent you from solving that problem effectively or from actually addressing, being consistent, or doing whatever it is you need to do to ensure that you are able to move from one level to another. The problem that we face and the enemy that behind our lack of consistency is looking at life from a story perspective or looking at life from a story structure. When we look at life from a story structure, we tend to remove all of the details that are around the situations that we are facing and only focus on one specific issue. When you focus on that issue without the context, it prevents you from appreciating that you are living a complete life and there are many things that are happening around you in that specific period of time. Your life is not just about the singular problem that you think is the greatest challenge in your life. You are facing that problem and you are also having other responsibilities around that problem. And if you just focus on one thing, your life is going to be out of balance, and ultimately that is going to affect your ability to address that one problem that you're facing. So having a holistic view of looking at life needs to be a greater part of how you make your decisions, not just zeroing in on one thing, like as though that is what I'm calling story structure. Zeroing in on one thing and thinking that this one thing is what is going to solve everything. Sometimes in trying to solve the one thing, you destroy other things that prevent you from solving this one thing. And the question is, how does that then apply to consistency? Consistency is lost when you are looking at life from a story structure because there is an expectation that the one problem that you're trying to sort out is going to be the only thing you're thinking about each and every day. But every day has got a lot of troubles, a lot of challenges, a lot of situations that you are going to encounter. And if you are pegging yourself just looking at one specific thing, that puts your life out of balance, and ultimately that makes it difficult for you to be consistent. Now, how do you address this enemy of looking at life from a story structure? It is by first understanding that in as much as we say life is a story, it is a story that is full of stories. In as much as we say that your life should be about one thing or one objective, there are many things that are happening in your life. There are many situations that you need to apply yourself in. And there are many things that you need to achieve in the course of your life. It is by appreciating that you need to choose what is the most important thing. Okay, what are the most important things to you? It is by deciding that there are certain things that you want to achieve, maybe by the time that you are through with this life, by the time that you are 90, there are things that you'd like to have seen, or there are things that you'd like to have done with your life. And looking back, making decisions each and every day that align with what ultimately matters to you as a person, and therefore doing those things every day so that eventually you become identified as somebody who is consistent on things that actually matter to them, things that ultimately count when it comes to living your life. When you are focusing on things that ultimately matter in your life and you're making decisions each and every day in that specific direction, what that is going to do for you is help you to be aligned, live a life that is more aligned with the things that matter to you and the things that you are supposed to do in the time that you are alive. Yeah, ultimately that is what life is supposed to be all about. And when you're doing those things each and every day, all of a sudden you become somebody who is consistent. So you are not thinking about consistency to achieve a specific goal, but you are living your life about things that matter to you, and that is actually what makes you consistent, because you're doing things that actually matter to you. So just to bring all these things together, we started by talking about stories and how we like to look at life from the perspective of stories. We said that looking at life from the perspective of stories is the enemy of the struggle with consistency, because stories don't provide the context or the full context of what is happening. Whereas in our lives, we are experiencing the full context of what is happening in our life, and that problem is just a part of that. So how we resolve that is by first taking a step back, thinking about the future and saying, what are these things that ultimately matter in my life? And starting to make decisions each and every day in that direction of the things that ultimately matter, to ensure that you are focused, that you are moving in a specific direction that is aligned with the things that ultimately matter to you. And after a while, you are going to be noticed and identified as somebody that is consistent, because you are living a life that is true and that is aligned with what makes you you. Now, that is today's video. I ask that every time you're listening to stories, please acknowledge that there's more context, so that you don't imagine that the life of that hero is supposed to be your life and find yourself struggling to be consistent. Acknowledge that there are things that matter to you most and start making decisions in that direction every day, and that is what is going to make you a consistent person. Until next time, Dennis Mboro, au revoir.